focusing on e-cigarettes. And I have no disclosures that I start. I always start off by saying that, right? Because it's important. I don't receive any money from the pharmaceutical industry or anything like that. I do a fair amount of research, but it's federally funded and there is no industry involvement. So just wanted to start off saying that. And going to start with a little bit of epidemiology, but then I want to really go into kind of this piece, which I think is so important to explore sort of the link between adverse childhood experiences and adolescent cigarette use and substance use in general, and how and the role stigma plays right in it. And the related objective I really want to cover is that we know this, and we've known this for at least 2 decades, that substance use disorders are chronic medical conditions that require appropriate treatment. And still there is so much stigma that people with substance use disorders are faced with, and that can actually worsen how people do, right? So I want to touch upon that, and then I'm going to go a little bit into how we assess for it, how we provide treatment, right? So kind of an ambitious agenda. I made the slides comprehensive. Feel free to use them. Share them, edit them, whatever. It's all good. They'll be sent out to you. And that's the reason I've included a lot of slides, is so they can just be available for you all, right? As frontline kind of people, right? Working within APS. Hopefully they can be a resource. And that's my hope, really. So we'll start with epidemiology. So why am I talking about vaping and not just about people smoking cigarettes, right? Well, here is why, and this is sort of data in New Mexico, in high school students, so grades 8 through 12. So in the most recent Department of Health report, about 9% of students report smoking cigarettes. But look at the e-cigarette use, 34% of our high schoolers report using e-cigarettes, and there's quite a bit of overlap between the two. Right? And the US isn't much better. It's about 33% in the US as a whole. So a lot of our youth are vaping and using e-cigarettes. And look how dramatically that has gone up. If I was giving this presentation like 10, 12 years ago, I would have said, vaping's not a big thing. Only about 1.5% of adolescents use e-cigarettes. So it's risen so dramatically, going from 1.5% almost to a third, right, of all our high schoolers using e-cigarettes, which is a really dramatic rise. And this is kind of showing this. So this blue line, this is New Mexico data, is looking at cigarette smoking. So you can see it's come down. We've done well with it. So in 2003, it was about 30% of our high schoolers were smoking cigarettes. And that has come down to under 10%, right? But look at the e-cigarettes. That's this green one. It's just, again, gone from, it was like 1% in around 2010. We started tracking it in New Mexico in 2015, when it was about a quarter of our high schoolers using e-cigarettes. And now it's about 34%. So it's just skyrocketed. And it's a big issue. And some counties, I know we're APS, right? So Bernalillo County here is at 32%. So about the same as the national rate. But look at some other New Mexico counties. If we look at Taos or Valencia, right, just to the south of us, Valencia is almost half of grades 9 through 12 reporting current e-cigarette use, which is staggering, right? And always gives me pause when I think about it. So why is that important? Why does this matter? Why should we care? And why do kids do it, right? First of all, let's start with that. And people have looked into that what makes e-cigarettes kind of seductive to our youth. And I think there's a number of reasons. There's this misperception of safety, right? And I hear this, right, when I work with adolescents still, where some kids say, well, there's no tar in it. I'm using e-cigarettes, so they must be safer. They must be safe because I'm not inhaling all the tar and all the other stuff that comes in cigarettes, right? Also, I think this was a few years ago where someone did a survey, and almost 20% of youth actually didn't even think that there was any tobacco in e-cigarettes. That, right, which is so I think tells me that we need to be doing a lot more education, targeting the youth, interfacing with them, and just providing education. Also, there is more acceptance, right? There isn't the smoke coming out. So there is more acceptance of indoor use, public use. And then all those social factors that become so important, especially when we're talking about adolescence, gaining respect from friends, looking cool, improving social status, but also kind of the other end of the spectrum, where some of our adolescents, maybe with underlying anxiety, underlying depression, are reporting that they smoke e-cigarettes to feel calm or to reduce stress or to reduce boredom, just having something to do, or to have new sensory experiences. E-cigarettes are marketed to youth, and there's lawsuits now against, Juul, for example, which really deliberately marketed to adolescents with their sleek designs that look like USB drives on computers, right? New flavors. And it's been reported that most youth, when they're vaping e-cigarettes, they're seeking out cartridges with flavored, kind of different flavors like mint or chocolate or strawberry, which is also kind of a draw as opposed to kind of traditional cigarettes, right? So I think those are some of the reasons why they do it. So kind of want to pause there. A little bit about cannabis. So you can see that cannabis use, unlike e-cigarette use in New Mexico, in adolescence has remained pretty constant, at least until 2019, which is kind of the most recent published comprehensive data. I'm curious to know what happens over the next couple of years with legalization, but at least until 2019, kind of well past the medical cannabis availability, that had remained relatively constant, but still higher, as you can see, in New Mexico than the United States as a whole. And here again, Bernalillo County, right at 28%, so around the state average, but higher than United States as a whole in terms of what, high schoolers, the percentage of high schoolers who use cannabis. So why should we care, right? So we know they're using it. We know why they're using it. We're sort of starting to get an idea of that. Why does it matter? Why should we be caring? And Tim put in chat that vaping companies are making the vaping devices so they can be concealed more easily and even used during class. Absolutely, this idea of stealth vaping, which is so popular. And I think that really was the heart of many of the lawsuits, right, against some of these manufacturers, where they really deliberately created advertisement that marketed to adolescents. And there's, because of those lawsuits, there's public domain reports available. And you can actually see some of the thinking behind some of these big companies that were making profits off of this, where they actually created, right? So Juul created a sort of a proprietary chemical that they call Juul salts, which was a kind of a chemically modified form of tobacco, which actually gets into the brain much quicker. So it's much more reinforcing, which also, of course, creates problems in terms of the addiction risk. And this was sort of specifically created, and that's out there in public domain documents as a result of the lawsuits. And there is money to be made. There is actually, I just a couple of months ago read that Philip Morris is in the process of maybe acquiring some of these e-cigarette manufacturers, which tells me they must have done their financial analysis and have decided that there is money to be made. So it's very concerning, and I share that with Tim. So what are the potential harms? Focusing on e-cigarettes, I think they fall into these three major categories. Cigarette smoking and downstream substance use is one. Respiratory and lung injury, the harm to the lungs, is second. And third, the harms to the developing brain, right, is a third big one. And I think all of these also apply certainly to the vaping of cannabis, although that's not the primary focus of my talk here, but I've included slides on it. So this is a question that comes up all the time, that what is the link or association between e-cigarettes and combustible cigarettes that people smoke? And this question comes up because if you look at adults, there is some data that actually shows that in some adults, e-cigarettes can help them quit combustible cigarettes, right? So it can be a harm reduction measure. But the reality is that adolescents are different from adults, right? And in adolescence to date, and this is according to the CDC in 2020, there are no data concerning e-cigarettes for smoking cessation in youth. and e-cigarettes are not recommended for uptake by youth or non-smokers due to potential serious risks from vaping. So in adolescence, in our youth, there's really no evidence saying that if they start using e-cigarettes, it will help them stop smoking cigarettes, which would be something to consider, and maybe is the case in some adults, right? In fact, if you look at just adolescents, what we find is that when adolescents start smoking e-cigarettes, they're actually more likely to start smoking combustible cigarettes. So it seems to be kind of the opposite, right? And there is some data I've included here that shows exactly that, right? That, you know, so if you look at it, this one I want to focus on. E-cigarette use actually predicts the use of combustible cigarettes with an estimated 3-fold risk in this one study to 4-fold risk in this more recent study of the risk of subsequent cigarette initiation. So, you know, so it's kind of seems to be counterproductive, where e-cigarettes are not helping our adolescents stop using cigarettes, but it's actually a risk factor for them going on to smoke combustible cigarettes. So that should make us think. And similarly, now there is growing data in the youth showing that when youth start using e-cigarettes, they're more likely to start smoking cannabis. So in a way, e-cigarette is like leading to a pathway that then leads to cannabis use in many youth, right? And you can see this study relatively recent from 2018, where e-cigarette use at 14 years of age was associated with almost a 4-fold increase in the odds of initiating and consistently using cannabis 2 years later. It's not causation, right? We don't know if e-cigarettes caused it. There are probably lots of factors involved in it, psychosocial factors, right? Primarily, maybe genetic factors, but it certainly is an association worth thinking about, right? So that's one risk, that e-cigarettes then are associated with the use of combustible cigarettes and also with the use of cannabis. The second big risk is the risk of lung injury. And this really happens because of chemicals, right? Again, this kind of goes against some of the prevailing idea that I hear that it doesn't have tar in it, so it must be safer than combustible cigarette. Well, not necessarily. There is no kind of tar, there is no combustible matter, but there are lots of other chemicals contained within e-cigarette aerosol. So when someone vapes it, everything aerosolizes, and in addition to that, look at all the things that are in it, right? There's flavoring agents such as diacetyl, which has been known to lead to serious lung injury. There are all these ultrafine particles that get deep inside the lungs. There are all these volatile organic compounds, cancer-causing chemicals, and also heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead, right? And then a lot of these vaping cartridges contain propylene glycol and glycerine. And if you look at the cartridges, if you go to a head shop right on Central and walk in, they're usually friendly. Like I actually took some of our addiction medicine trainees who are kind of these advanced trainees to a tour of local head shops last month, just to talk to the shop owners. You should know what's out there. And they were very happy, the owners, to show what products they have. And a lot of these vaping cartridges say on them that they contain glycol, propylene glycol, and glycerine, and it says that those are food-grade compounds. And it's true, right? Those are often in food we eat, but we don't aerosolize the food we eat, right? There's really no data on what happens when these compounds are aerosolized and get deep in your lungs. And in fact, now that's what we are finding out, is that those things are not safe when they get in the lungs. They've been linked to things like asthma and COPD. There was this pretty important study that showed that teenagers who were vaping, the odds of them getting COVID early in the days of the pandemic were 5-fold. So kids who were vaping were 5 times more likely to get COVID. And partly what's happening is that when all those chemicals get in the lungs, the immune system is deeply affected, right? So our bodies aren't able to fight off a lot of the infectious agents that we come in contact with. It also leads to a lot of localized inflammation, which can also lead to a lot of symptoms like worsening of asthma, for example, is the classic one. And so it's the kids who already have asthma, unsurprisingly, are at some of the highest harm of lung effects from cigarettes. including more worsening cough, wheezing, and asthma exacerbations. And secondhand smoke certainly can lead to that as well. And then several years ago, some of you guys maybe remember this or may have thought of it or heard of it, this thing called EVALI, which stood for e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, which really peaked in 2020. It was all these healthy young people, right? Adolescents, young adults who are winding up in the hospital with severe lung damage, right? And they all shared one thing in common. They had used vaping products within the previous 3 months. I will point out that EVALI is much more associated with when kids smoke the cartridges containing synthetic THC. That's what it's primarily been associated with it, as opposed to e-cigarettes. And it's really been shown that the vitamin E acetate that's contained in THC cartridges leads to this severe lung damage. So if you have kids who are vaping cartridges that contain synthetic cannabinoids, it's really worth talking to them about it, that, hey, were you aware? Just raising the idea, right? Is it okay if I share this with you? But we know that this has happened. And in fact, California Normal, right, which is kind of a in some ways, sort of pro-cannabis advocacy organization, just put out an alert a month or two ago that at least in California, some of the head shops are selling cartridges containing all these new chemicals that are made in labs, which are also associated, they're finding out, with EVALI. So right now, California at least is reporting another peak of these cannabis related lung injury epidemiology. So kids are winding up in hospitals. So we're seeing that increase in California. It hasn't been shown in New Mexico yet, but it does put me on alert. And finally, cognitive neurodevelopmental risks. Lots more data of this with cannabis, including in some of the studies that kids who start smoking cannabis, it may lead to a small but consistent loss of IQ points. About 2 points of IQ are lost in some of the newer studies. Some of the older studies were much more dramatic. They showed that like 7, 8 IQ points are lost, but those studies are not good quality studies. I still hear that cited a lot. So I like to point out that it's probably not that extreme. And in some of the newer studies, what they've shown is that adolescents who start using cannabis, particularly early, teenage years, who use high potency THC, who use it regularly, wind up losing about 2 points in their IQ. And also more mental health problems. Not a whole lot of data on e-cigarettes, but with cannabis, it's been shown clearly that people have trouble with, a variety of neurocognitive processing issues, including focusing on tasks, memory problems, etc. Cannabis also is addictive. We've known this for a long time, just like e-cigarettes are. And I put this slide largely because I still hear this, that maybe it's not addictive, but in fact, it is addictive. And this is a quote from Nora Volkov, who's the director of the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, from way back in 2004, right? 2 decades ago, in the dark ages of mid-2000s, showing there is no question marijuana can be addictive, right? That argument is over. The most important thing right now is to understand the vulnerability of young developing brains to these increased concentrations of cannabis. And to me, this is the key point. Adolescents are different from us as adults because unlike us, their brains are still developing, right? There's some really important developmental processes that are happening, and we just don't know what happens to those developing brains when chemicals from outside, really any chemical, is exposed, right? The 3 factors we do know that when we talk about cannabis and youth, the 3 factors that lead to the worst outcomes, right, is early onset. And by that, I mean certainly onset of cannabis use before the age of 14 seems to be really the worst. High potency. And by high potency, most studies mean THC concentrations of over 10%. I don't know if any of you have ever been to a dispensary in New Mexico. I think I have, right? And I think that it's nearly impossible to find cannabis available recreationally with THC of less than 10%. You're just not going to find it. It's very hard to find. So basically, everything that's in the market is what would be considered high potency right now, and frequent use. So use either daily or near daily. That trio increases the risk for addiction. It increases the risk for all these other negative consequences, including psychosis. This is really interesting data, and we've known this for, again, more and more data for a couple of years that shows that, certain youth, certain adolescents, there's likely some genetic vulnerabilities that we can't always tell, right? We don't really have sophisticated testing to test people for it. That doesn't cost thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So we have no way to really realistically test for some of these genetic components. But certain youth who have certain, basically little changes in their genetic makeup that all of us have, but certain youth have certain ones that make them significantly more likely to actually develop a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder if they're exposed to cannabis at a young age on a regular basis. And cannabis is considered one of the few modifiable risk factors for first episode psychosis. And for our adolescents who already have a psychotic disorder, when they start using cannabis, that's been associated with basically a worse course of their psychotic illness, right? And again, it's this trio: early onset, high potency, more than 10% THC, and frequent use. It's that triad that leads to the highest risk. And this was a really interesting study done in like several countries in Western Europe. It was published just about 3 years ago. What they found is that if high potency cannabis was just taken off the market, right? Cannabis with over 10% THC, about 12% of cases of first episode psychosis could be prevented across 11 sites in primarily in Western Europe, which is really fascinating. So most kids who use cannabis, I want to be clear, don't develop a psychotic disorder, right? Because in general population, it's about 1% of people develop psychotic illness. But kids who use cannabis, that goes up to about 2%. So overall, it's still a minority, but it's doubled, right? And if you think about how much impact the psychotic illness has in a person's life and for a society, for a community, it's still worth thinking about. And these are just some of the other harms, psychosocially, educational attainment, employment, relationships, have all sort of been associated with cannabis use in teens. So that's why it's important. Now, can I just glance at the time? Make sure we're good. We're doing okay with time. Kind of explore this link a little bit between adverse childhood experiences and social determinants of health, which are clearly risk factors for all substance use disorders. I'll go to this slide first. Lots of research on this, which basically show that our substance use disorders, right, whether we're talking about cannabis use disorder or alcohol or cocaine or opioids, it's about 50% genetic and about 50% environmental. So it's half-half. And interestingly, if I was showing you a slide, if I was doing a presentation right now on type 2 diabetes, or if I was doing a presentation on asthma or hypertension, it would be the same. 50% genetics, 50% environmental, right? So our addictions, right, substance use disorders are no different from other medical illnesses in that about half the contribution comes from our genes, what we bring, through heredity, and the other half from the environment. And we can't control the genes, but we sure can do things to work on this environmental factor and can actually make a huge difference. And that's why I think in many ways, right? I mean, you guys, right, that are front line working with the youth, with adolescents, have a huge role to play, because you can actually do little things that can change the trajectory of someone's life by early intervention, right? So yeah, genetic impact. So substance use disorders are similar to other medical chronic illnesses. We've known this for a long time, where the contribution is about half from, diathesis, which is predisposition due to genes, and the other half stress, which is very often childhood traumas and adversities. And when you put them together, that's when you get the disorder, right? So while they're similar to other medical illnesses, still they're highly stigmatized. Substance use disorders remain probably the most stigmatized illness in the world. And I'm comfortable saying that, making that bold statement that they are the most stigmatized illness we have. This was not from the dark ages, just under 10 years old. It was a huge population-wide survey where they asked people about their attitudes about people with mental illness, which is I've listed in blue, right, which are stigmatized themselves. All mental illnesses are stigmatized. And in red are substance use disorders, which are even more stigmatized. And I think some of this is striking. You can see only 22% would work with someone who had a substance use disorder. 64%, that's 2/3 of people, and this was a huge survey done in the United States and a couple of other Western countries. I believe Australia was one, England was one, right? Believed employers should be able to deny employment to people affected by addiction, that they should not be able to get employed because of their illness. 43%, that's almost half, opposed giving individuals with substance use disorders the same health insurance benefits granted to otherwise healthy individuals. 90% were unwilling to have a person with a substance use disorder, that's what their SUD is, marry into their family. And over half thought landlords should be able to deny housing to a person with substance use disorder. Like, think about this for a moment, right? I mean, I'm like flabbergasted every time I see these slides, although I've been presenting them for at least 2-3 years, these slides in one form or another. What would our lives be like? What would my life be like if these are the kind of attitudes I was faced with day in and day out, right? These labels, these stigmas that get attached to people. And our language matters. That's what this slide is getting at. This was a very interesting study that was done several years ago, right? And what they did is actually two groups of people read the same exact story. It was a story about a person. Everything was the same except one little phrase. One group read about the kind of basically the person with an addiction, right? Like a person first language, like person with a substance use disorder. And the other group read about a substance abuser, right? It's minor difference. And then they asked them like about their attitudes about that person. And the group that read about the person with a substance use disorder, a majority thought they should get treatment and a minority thought they should be incarcerated. But when the group read about the substance abuser, everything else was the same, remember? It flipped to where a minority thought the person should get treatment and the majority thought the person should be incarcerated. And I include this slide. We do a lot of training on stigma, but stigma is prevalent. And I hear this, that isn't it just semantics or political correctness, what language we use, but it really matters because it matters in the attitudes that get projected towards people who are living with this, right? And everything else, all of the other things that at least I see in my clinical practice, right? Someone can have a substance use disorder, but can be a great family member, can be overcoming tremendous adversities, working towards their GED or working towards that promotion. All of that gets ignored. And the thing that society hones in on is their illness. And remember, the illness is no different from our medical illnesses. If we're thinking about like, genetic contribution or treatment adherence or relapse rates, but in our minds, it's very different. And I propose that's likely due to stigma. And what studies have shown is that when people are faced with it, the stigma gets turned inwards, right? Shame, guilt, low self-esteem, low self-efficacy. Why should I even try? People are still gonna judge me. Demoralization, feelings of inadequacy. And when that happens, and this is according to lots of research, outcomes are worsened, right? People are less likely to seek and stay in treatment. People have worse mental health, worse physical health. This is when people have internalized stigma, decreased employment, unstable housing, breakdown of social support systems, and worse substance use disorders outcome. And here I've included, these are the components of recovery as defined by SAMHSA, right? So what SAMHSA says and other professional organizations, that hope about the future is the center of recovery, right? And the other components are health, physical and emotional. having a safe, stable place to live, having a sense of purpose, that I have a purpose in life, having a supportive, trusting community. And look at these outcomes when people are faced with stigma. They are direct opposite to components of recovery, right? So I guess the point I'm making is that when stigma is there, when it's out there, people turn that stigma inwards. And when that happens, that directly opposes the process of someone's recovery, right? So important to keep in mind. And I start with that as I go a little bit into adverse childhood experiences, because I think it's important for us to realize that there's that big environmental factor that impacts someone's trajectory in terms of developing substance use disorders. And adverse childhood experiences are big. ACEs, that's what it stands for, right? And New Mexico, the proportion of children who have had at least 2 or more ACEs is significantly higher than children nationwide, right? 1 in 4, actually 25% of New Mexico adults report 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, which to me is staggering. And if you look at incarcerated youth that are in the criminal justice system, 86% report having had 4 or more ACEs, and 96% struggle with substance use disorders, which in turn leads to multi-generational trauma, right? Because often when the substance use disorder is there, there's early CYFD involvement, children are taken out of homes, and it creates this cycle. I apologize, I've had a cold since yesterday. So ACEs, what we know is that the more adverse childhood experiences someone has, the more likely they are to develop substance use disorders, all of them, including kind of harder drugs, but also including tobacco and including cannabis and alcohol. So strong link and cumulative risk. The more ACEs someone has, the more at risk they are, right? And you can see that with tobacco, having experienced any adverse childhood experiences related to it, if someone has one, or if someone has multiple ACEs, right, you can see how much higher the odds are of developing CUD, that's cannabis use disorder. TUD is tobacco use disorder, and DUD is other drug use disorder. So ACEs clearly matter. And this is from a recent study from 2022 that looked at social determinants of health and how they play into adolescent vaping, either nicotine or cannabis. And look at some of these, right? These are all psychosocial factors. These are not genetic factors. Parental smoking or vaping, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, intimate partner violence, household substance use. You can see here, peer victimization is a huge one. Bullying, we gotta be focusing efforts on that, are all associated with it. So this is a challenge, but I would pose that this is also an opportunity for us, right? As community members, as teachers, as people who work in school-based health centers or work with adolescents who may already be at risk. These are the protective factors in a huge study that was again done recently, right? These are some of the protective factors. The ones I've listed in red are the things I think we as non-parents can really provide potentially through creating systems or through our own individual involvement, knowing culture or language. So if you're working, for example, with Indigenous youth, creating programming that involves elders, connects the youth to their traditions, to their language, is protective. That's been shown in multiple studies, right? Having that connection with culture, having a trusted adult at school, right? Even so, even as an individual can actually make a huge difference. Having a trusted adult in the community. So even beyond school, these are all things that can matter. And I've actually included a link here for you guys, which lists risks and protective factors by age, because it does differ. And of course, I can't cover all of it in a short presentation. So I've got that link there that hopefully can be a resource for you guys. And lastly, I'm not going to take too long in this. I'll take about 12 minutes and then open it up for questions, is going into some assessment and treatment considerations, right? So I'm going to start with this little slide and then go back to the previous slide. This is several years old. SBIRT, some of you guys may have heard of it, right? Is a model that's been widely supported. It stands for screening, brief interventions, and referral to treatment. That can be implemented in a variety of settings, including school-based health centers, right? For example, and it starts with screening. Of course, we don't know what's going on until we screen for substance use disorder. So we start with screening, right? So let's start with that. So you start with this simple question. I've got this again, it's here, I've linked it, so you guys can look at it, reference it. During the past 12 months, did you, one, drink any alcohol? So is this screening for alcohol and other substance use, right? More than a few sips. 2, smoke any marijuana or hashish. 3, use anything else to get high. That can include illegal drugs, prescription drugs, inhalants, etc. And if they say no to everything, great, right? That's wonderful. And we basically praise them. We give them positive reinforcement, right? You made some good decisions, right? Congratulations. And then you still do this thing called car question, which is this, right? Please don't ever ride with a driver who has had even a single drink, because people can feel that it's safe to drive when it's not, right? And there is this little contract for life that can be offered, and that's public domain and that's widely used, right? But if they say yes to any of these, then you go into this thing called craft that I've included again for reference, right? I should probably switch the 2 slides, but it's the first time I'm doing this full talk here. So for next time, if I do it, I'll switch the 2 slides to avoid confusion. But these are the 5 questions, really simple, simply 5 questions, right? Have you ever ridden in a car driven by someone, including yourself, who were high or had been using alcohol or drugs? Do you ever use alcohol or drugs to relax, feel better about yourself, to fit in? Do you ever use alcohol or drugs by yourself, alone, right? Do you ever forget things you did? Did your family or friends ever tell you that you should cut down? And have you ever gotten into trouble, right? So it's a little acronym, CRAFT, C-R-A-F-F-T. So it's 6 questions only, but you ask those. And the cutoff is 2. So if someone scores under 2, so 0 or 1, they're low risk. So you go here, you give them brief advice, right? And I've included the language that you can use. You basically recommend that they stay away from this. We offer them resources. But if they score over 2, these are the youth that are high risk, right? Then you go into from screening to a more comprehensive assessment, right? And based upon that, you kind of come up with a plan, right? You do a more thorough assessment, and I'm going to go into that in the next few slides. And then you can just give sort of brief intervention, which includes like basic motivational interviewing. Or if there's signs of addiction, that's when you really wind up referring them to treatment. And I've included some resources, which admittedly, in terms of resources, treatment, and ground, are quite limited across New Mexico, including here in Albuquerque, right? So this is a nice little algorithm for you guys for assessment, for screening, if there is anyone here who works in a school-based health system or such a setting, right? So it's often also called 5As. So say you're here, you do this craft and they score over 2. This is when you're going to do this assessment. So the assessment we often call the 5As, because everything starts with the letter A, right? Nice little acronym. You ask, and I'm focusing here on nicotine, right? But you can do this with any substance. Cast a wide net. Don't just ask. Some practical tips. Do you smoke cigarettes? Because 90% of kids are going to say no. But if you say, do you use any nicotine, including e-cigs or Juul or vaping or pods or mods, then you might get a larger response. What do you vape? Again, is it cannabis? Is it e-cigarettes? Is it cannabis flower? Or is it these cartridges? There can be a lot of things. So you want to pin it down. And asking about cigarettes per day is a lot less useful in today's day and age, right? We review the risk factors. Does anyone smoke in your friends, your household? Assessing for psychiatric disorders, any trauma history, other substances, and really considerations about confidentiality. Very often I will interview them without parent or guardian, with the idea that, of course, in certain cases, I have to break confidentiality. If I'm worried about imminent harm to yourself or others, I cannot keep that confidential, but otherwise within bounds, we will remain confidential. And then we narrow it down, right? There is also a couple of nicotine specific tools that I use. that I've included for reference. There is the HONK, which is the Hooked on Nicotine Checklist, and the Modified Fagerstrom Tolerance Questionnaire. And usually for the kids in whom I'm doing it, the Modified Fagerstrom works really well because I know they already are using cigarettes or using tobacco. And I've included both of those for reference. So everything hopefully should be in these slides for you guys. Also a little slide on some of the key questions to ask. I won't cover all of them, but they're there for reference if anyone wants to use them about what questions should you ask. So once you ask, then you figure out what's going on, then you advise. And I like to give direct advice with our youth, right? With permission, respectfully, but it should be clear. It should be unequivocal. That has been shown to be important in this setting. I think it is important for you to quit smoking now, and I can help you, right? So I won't abandon you. You're not on your own. We care about you. We support you. And I think it's important for you not to be smoking at all, right? One of the things I often say is this: as your doctor, I want you to know that quitting smoking is the most important thing you can do right now to protect your health now in the future. I will help you do that. I feel comfortable saying that because I believe in that, right? Then you assess the motivation for quitting. How ready are you? And then assist them, setting a quit date, providing new goals, and arrange for treatment. It's been reported that after you have this initial conversation, you should see them again in a week and then a month later. And there are lots of different interventions that can be offered psychotherapeutically, depending on what's available. There is also the Quit Line, and there is this really cool Quick Start app by the CDC that you guys should check out. It's really, I've referred many youth to that. It's an app on their phone, and it individualizes the recommendations and treatment recommendations it gives. And then I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but we do have treatments that, right, you had to refer them to treatment for. But if you have someone in the school-based health center who can do it, right, it's a good idea. In youth, I'm focusing on adolescents, right? By far for smoking, for nicotine use, the most evidence is for nicotine replacement therapy. Usually combination of a patch, which is long-acting, combined with a short-acting one such as gum or lozenge, combined with behavioral support, which can be some of these things that we talked about: this advice, support, checking in with them, just good human things that we can do. Doesn't have to be anything super fancy, right? But even just being there for the child is so important, right? And that really does matter. And most data for youth is the nicotine patch, so I've included that here. Bupropion, there are 2 medications approved by the FDA for smoking cessation, bupropion and varenicline, but there is really not a lot of data for youth. There is some data of bupropion at a high dose combined with contingency management, which is basically a reward-based system, but not as much data as the patches for these medications. But this is just a list of all the psychosocial approaches that are effective for youth. Again, this is very youth specific. So I included this so people can take inventory of what you have available in your setting. Maybe something sort of strikes your fancy and that's something you want to learn more about or explore, in which case Julie and I and our SOR team can probably help set up trainings, maybe, right, in a specific area here to provide more resources, more training, etc. I think we are happy to support that. I'm speaking for Julie, but I know Julie well, and she always wants to help. So I feel okay saying that. Brief intervention for cannabis use, and I think this also applies to all substances, has actually been studied in youth. Doesn't take a whole lot of effort. And it's shown that it's actually very effective, right? There was actually this 3 sessions, so it's only 3 sessions of brief intervention that was developed for school-based settings. And that's worked. There are also new technology delivered interventions that seem to work. So this is the brief intervention. That's what this BI stands for cannabis. And again, I've included, this is 3 sessions, 3 60-minute sessions. And the third one is optional. And this can really be delivered by anyone in a school-based health system. This is what it was developed for. And this includes some of the components of it. And that actually in a couple of studies have been shown to improve outcomes in terms of youth using less cannabis, right? So something to think about. For cannabis, we don't have any FDA-approved medications, but there are a few medications that we do use. in our setting in the UNM system that are not evidence-based, but can help certain youth under certain circumstances. And lastly, I told you I'll end at 3:20. It's 3:19 now, so I'm gonna stick to time. So I've included a lot of resources. This is, from SAMHSA, from Youth Now, resource for parents. There is also the drugfree.org's Marijuana Resource Center. Truth Initiative actually has a free curriculum for schools that you can go and sort of explore. And, if someone is interested, the Truth Initiative helps with the implementation as well, from what I understand. Then there is this This Is Quitting, sort of a phone app that helps with it. There is also a free course for healthcare providers, teachers, and community members. If anyone wants to take a deep dive, available by the American Lung Institute, I believe, is what this website is. So there's tons out there. There is the Quick Start app, as I mentioned as well. School-based health centers, just having that improves outcomes. Certainly, we're happy to help, you can certainly reach out to me or any of us for further trainings, for further information. And we're exploring right now. We have the STAR program within UNM for adolescents, but that's a fairly small program. And we're sort of really trying to explore how to grow that and make referrals easier, because I understand it remains a big barrier. And we're also doing work with a lot of pediatricians to get them comfortable providing some of these treatments as well. So important things, right? Keep in mind these resources, explore them. Think about if there is anything you want to know more. I'm happy to sort of continue to partner with you guys and all the important work you do to maybe hopefully maybe do more trainings or more education, etc. I hope this was somewhat helpful and I didn't waste anyone's time. Again, the slides are available for anyone, and I'll stop here and see if anyone has questions. Does that sound okay, Julie?